The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of the mansion, reflecting off the marble floors that gleamed like still water. The house was silent except for the faint rhythm of a broom sweeping against the floor. Maria, the maid, worked quietly as she did every day, her movements measured and graceful. She knew her place in the grand household of Mr. Alden Hayes, a man whose wealth stretched across continents and whose arrogance filled every room he entered. He was a self-made millionaire, proud of his business empire, his luxurious home, and his sense of superiority over those who served him. To him, his staff were invisible, tools in the background of his success. But today would be different. Today, the invisible would be seen, and the proud would be humbled. Alden sat in his study, surrounded by mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books he rarely opened. On his desk lay a letter, written in an unfamiliar language. It had arrived that morning from a potential business partner in Eastern Europe, someone offering a deal too good to ignore. The only problem was that the letter wasn't in English, and Alden had no idea what it said. He frowned at it for a moment, annoyed, then called out sharply, "Maria!" His voice echoed through the hall. She appeared at the door within moments, her apron slightly dusted with flour from the kitchen, her expression calm and attentive. "Yes, sir?" she said softly, keeping her eyes low. Alden held up the letter, a smug grin curling at his lips. "You like to read, don't you, Maria?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. He knew she often carried a small, old book with her, something she read during her breaks in the servants' quarters. He found it amusing that someone in her position pretended to be educated. Maria nodded hesitantly. "Yes, sir. I do read when I can." Alden leaned back in his chair and waved the paper slightly. "Then perhaps you can translate this for me," he said, chuckling under his breath. "Tell you what, if you can translate it correctly, my salary is yours for the month. How's that for motivation?" His laughter filled the room, rich and arrogant. The other maids nearby exchanged nervous glances. Everyone knew his sense of humor was cruel. He expected failure, and he wanted to be entertained by it. Maria, however, did not flinch. She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her apron, her eyes briefly scanning the letter on the desk. For a moment, Alden thought she might refuse or panic. Instead, she said quietly, "May I read it, sir?" Alden handed it to her, smirking as if watching a child trying to solve a riddle. Maria's eyes moved across the paper with surprising fluency. Her lips parted slightly as she began to whisper the words under her breath. The room grew still. Alden's smirk faded as he realized she wasn't hesitating. She was understanding. Her tone grew confident as she began to translate aloud, her voice steady and clear. The letter, she explained, was a formal offer from a foreign company proposing a joint venture, detailing specific terms, figures, and conditions. She even corrected a small translation error in a name that Alden himself had misread. By the time she finished, the millionaire's amusement had vanished. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on her in disbelief. How do you know that language?" he asked finally, his voice lower, uncertain for the first time. Maria folded the paper neatly and placed it back on his desk. "I studied linguistics at the University of Bucharest," she said softly, "before coming here." The words hung in the air like a revelation. The other maids froze in the hallway, listening in shock. Alden blinked, trying to process what he had just heard. You studied abroad?" he asked incredulously. "Then why are you working here as a maid?" Maria gave a small, weary smile. "Because life does not always go as planned, sir. My husband passed away and I had debts to pay. I came here to work to send money back home for my mother. Cleaning houses was the only job available." Alden leaned back in his chair, suddenly silent. His arrogance had met a quiet, unshakable dignity that money couldn't measure. He felt a strange discomfort twisting in his chest, something between guilt and shame. He had mocked her, assuming ignorance where there was intelligence, weakness where there was strength. The contrast between them, the millionaire who couldn't read a foreign document and the maid who could, was as stark as the polished marble beneath their feet. For once, Alden didn't have a clever remark. He simply stared at the woman who had just shattered his illusion of superiority. Maria, sensing his silence, began to step back toward the door. "If there's nothing else, sir, I'll return to my duties," she said quietly. But before she could leave, Alden spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "Maria," he said. "Wait." She turned. He looked at the letter again, then at her, still trying to reconcile the image of a humble maid with the sharp intellect he had just witnessed. "Would you be interested in helping me with future correspondence? Translating, perhaps?" he asked awkwardly. It wasn't just an offer, it was a small attempt at making amends. Maria nodded politely. "If you wish, sir." She turned to leave, her expression unreadable, though a faint trace of pride flickered in her eyes. When she disappeared through the doorway, Alden sat in silence for a long time. The paper on his desk no longer looked like a simple business letter. It had become a mirror, showing him his own narrowness, his assumptions, his blindness to the people around him. He realized that beneath the uniforms and quiet servitude, stories lived, stories of sacrifice, education, tragedy, and resilience. As the clock ticked in the quiet study, Alden's mind replayed the moment when Maria began to translate. He remembered how her voice had carried calm authority, how her presence had transformed from invisible to commanding without arrogance or defiance. He had laughed at her before, expecting ignorance. Instead, he had been taught a lesson that no amount of wealth could buy. His laughter had vanished, replaced by a silent respect he didn't quite know how to express. The woman he had dismissed as a maid had just shown him what true intelligence and dignity looked like. Later that evening, as he dined alone, his thoughts drifted again to the letter and the quiet strength in Maria's eyes. He realized that the world he lived in, the one built on wealth and status, was fragile compared to the world of people like her. Those who endured, adapted, and carried unseen brilliance beneath humble appearances. For the first time in a long while, Alden felt small, not in defeat, but in humility. And though he would never admit it aloud, he knew that the lesson that day had been worth far more than his entire month's salary. The afternoon light filtered softly through the high windows of the estate, casting long, golden streaks across the tiled floor. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and lemon oil, the scent of daily labor carried out by hands that went mostly unnoticed. Maria moved silently through the house, her presence almost ghost-like, her tasks practiced and precise. To the household, she was simply the maid, the woman who made the beds, scrubbed the floors, and served tea. No one ever asked who she was before she came here, where she came from, or what dreams she had once carried. Yet beneath the simple uniform and quiet demeanor lay a woman whose past was marked not by servitude but by scholarship, a life once filled with books, ideas, and the music of different languages that now only echoed faintly in her memory. Years before she had become the Maid, Maria had been a linguist, a teacher, and a translator in her home country. Words were her passion. They connected her to the world, gave her identity and purpose. She had spent her youth immersed in languages, French, English, Russian, even Latin. Her professors called her gifted. Her peers admired her brilliance, and she dreamed of one day working for the United Nations. But then her world shifted. Economic collapse struck, her family fell into debt, and her husband fell ill. His treatment drained their savings. And when he died, Maria found herself standing in the ruins of her old life, holding nothing but the remnants of her education and a fierce will to survive. She left her homeland not out of choice but necessity, crossing oceans in search of work that would let her rebuild. The only job she could find quickly was as a domestic worker in a foreign city, a place where her accent marked her as an outsider and her past achievements meant nothing in the mansion where she now worked. She became part of the background, her intellect buried beneath layers of routine. Mr. Alden Hayes, the master of the house, was a man of immense wealth and little empathy. To him, people like Maria were invisible, a necessary convenience in the smooth machinery of his life. He prided himself on being a man of success and intellect, yet his understanding of the world ended where his privilege began. He never imagined that the woman cleaning his study had once been more educated than some of his business partners. Maria never corrected him, never sought recognition, for she had learned that in certain worlds, silence was the shield of the wise. Then one morning, fate staged its quiet irony. Alden received a letter written in a foreign tongue, a document of great importance from an international client. He frowned at it, annoyed that none of his staff could make sense of it. When Maria entered to dust the bookshelves, he called out to her with his usual tone of command, his lips twisting into a smirk. "You like to read, don't you, Maria? Let's see if you can read this." The words were sharp with mockery. He held out the paper, already amused by the idea of her confusion. "Translate this and my salary is yours," he added with a laugh, thinking himself clever. The laughter of arrogance always echoed loudest in the presence of power, and yet it was about to be silenced by something deeper. Dignity Maria took the letter without hesitation, her eyes gliding over the words. The script was familiar, the phrases clear. It was written in Romanian, her native language. The irony almost made her smile, but she hid it behind calm restraint. Alden watched her expectantly, waiting for a stammer or a nervous glance. Instead, Maria began to read softly, her tone confident, her pronunciation perfect. "Sentence by sentence," she translated, each word measured and precise. The letter outlined a business proposal, discussing partnership terms, profits, and logistics. As she spoke, Alden's expression shifted from amusement to astonishment. He leaned forward, realizing she wasn't guessing. She was fluent. She understood every nuance, every technical term, every idiom that even an educated translator might hesitate over. When she finished, she placed the letter back on the desk and stepped back respectfully for a long moment. Alden said nothing. His arrogance had been disarmed by something far more powerful than wealth: knowledge. "Where did you learn that?" he finally asked, his voice softer, almost uncertain. Maria met his gaze briefly. "It's my mother tongue," she said simply. "I studied linguistics and translation before coming here." The words fell like quiet thunder. To Alden, who had spent years equating money with intelligence, the revelation felt disorienting. The maid he had mocked was a scholar. The woman he dismissed as a servant was, in truth, a master of languages. His world, built on assumptions of hierarchy, cracked just enough for humility to seep in. The story of Maria's hidden education spread quietly among the household staff. To them, she became a symbol of quiet pride, proof that worth wasn't tied to uniforms or paychecks. But for Maria, it was just another day, a reminder that dignity doesn't need an audience. She had long accepted that people often see only what they want to see. The real strength lay in knowing oneself, in carrying the weight of one's past with grace rather than bitterness. The same mind that once deciphered literature and treaties now organized cupboards and balanced ledgers, but it was no less sharp. Her value didn't depend on who recognized it. Alden, on the other hand, found himself haunted by that moment. He began to look at Maria differently, not with pity or discomfort, but with a quiet respect he hadn't known how to express. It humbled him to realize how many lives around him were stories untold, how easily the powerful mistake silence for ignorance. He thought of his own arrogance, the laughter that morning, the smug challenge, and felt a sting of shame. For the first time, he understood that intelligence wears many faces, and sometimes it hides beneath aprons and calloused hands. That day, the hierarchy between them subtly shifted. He didn't apologize. Pride rarely allows it. But his tone changed. His laughter grew softer. He asked fewer questions meant to mock and more meant to learn. Maria's life continued much the same. She still rose before dawn, still cleaned, still saved what she could to send home. But something in her heart felt lighter, as if the truth had finally stretched its wings after years of quiet confinement. She didn't need his praise. She already knew her worth. She had once translated literature. Now she translated survival. The words may have changed, but the intelligence remained the same, untouched by circumstance. In the months that followed, Alden often called her to assist with letters or documents from abroad. Each time, she translated efficiently, never boasting, never reminding him of that first encounter. He, in turn, began to listen when she spoke, a subtle acknowledgement of her quiet wisdom. Their dynamic became one of mutual recognition, a silent truce between pride and humility. And though the world outside would never know their story, within that mansion stood a quiet testament to the unpredictable power of knowledge, the invisible depth of those we overlook. and the fragile line between superiority and respect that one humbling moment can erase. When Alden Hayes woke that morning, he believed he understood the world. In his mind, people were divided into neat categories: the successful and the unsuccessful, the strong and the weak, the educated and the ignorant. His wealth had built not only walls of marble and glass around him, but also invisible walls in his mind, separating him from those he believed were beneath him. He had long stopped seeing the humanity in the people who worked for him: the maid who polished his floors, the cook who prepared his meals, the driver who opened his car door. They were part of the machinery of his comfort, not individuals with histories, struggles, or dreams. His arrogance wasn't malicious. It was habitual, born from years of success and flattery. But life has a quiet way of humbling the proud, often through the people they least expect. That day, as he sat in his study reviewing papers and contracts, a sealed letter arrived on his desk. The envelope bore the crest of a European firm he hoped to collaborate with. The opportunity was immense, the deal potentially worth millions. But when he tore open the letter, his eyes narrowed in frustration. It was written in a foreign language he didn't understand. He pressed the intercom for his assistant, but she was away. His impatience grew. Then his eyes caught sight of Maria, the maid, dusting the bookshelves. Without thinking, he called her over, his tone casual yet condescending. "Maria, come here a moment," he said, waving the paper in the air. "You like reading, don't you? Let's see if you can make sense of this. Translate it for me, and who knows, maybe my salary is yours this month." He laughed at his own joke, a deep, self-satisfied laugh that filled the room. It was meant as entertainment, a little exercise in humiliation. Maria walked over quietly, her eyes calm, her expression composed. She didn't rise to the mockery. She'd heard it before. Her life had taught her that arrogance is just another form of blindness. Taking the paper in her hands, she looked at it for a moment. The words were clear to her. It was written in her native tongue. She began to read softly, translating line by line, her voice steady, every sentence carrying both precision and quiet strength. Alden's laughter faded as quickly as it had begun. He leaned forward, realizing she wasn't pretending. She knew every word. She even corrected minor grammatical errors in the original text, explaining them with ease. The letter, it turned out, contained crucial details about the terms of the business offer. When she finished, she handed the paper back to him, her movements poised and dignified. For a long while, Alden didn't speak. His jaw was tense, his eyes fixed on her in disbelief. It was the first time he had truly looked at her, not as a servant, but as a person. He saw the quiet intelligence behind her eyes, the fluency in her speech, the calm confidence that didn't demand attention yet commanded it naturally. "How do you know that language?" he asked, his voice smaller now. Maria's reply was simple, stripped of pride or bitterness. "It's my mother tongue. I studied linguistics before coming here." The words were like stones dropping into a still pond, creating ripples that reached something deep within him. He asked nothing more, though the question burned inside him. How does a linguist end up polishing floors? The truth was simple, though painful. Life had stripped Maria of many things: her home, her husband, her career, but not her dignity. She had once stood at podiums, teaching language and literature to students. She had once been respected for her intellect. But when tragedy and debt swallowed her life, she had traded her books for brooms, her lectures for silence. Yet even in the quiet servitude of her new existence, she had never allowed bitterness to erode her grace. In her heart, she still carried the beauty of knowledge, the power of patience, and the humility to keep moving forward. Alden, in contrast, had built his life around external validation, titles, money, applause. Maria's quiet brilliance struck him like a mirror reflecting what he lacked in that moment. Something shifted inside him. The line that had once separated master and servant began to blur. He realized that intelligence, wisdom, and worth don't belong to any class or income level. They are universal, often hidden beneath the simplest appearances. The arrogance that once fueled his confidence now felt hollow. He thought about all the times he had dismissed people without truly knowing them, all the assumptions he had made simply because of their clothes or their jobs. Maria had not lectured him, had not demanded respect. She had simply revealed truth through her calm competence. It was a lesson far sharper than any he had learned in business. Later that evening, Alden found himself reflecting on the encounter as he sat alone in the grand dining room. The chandeliers sparkled above him, but the space felt emptier than ever. He thought of Maria's hands, calloused from work yet steady as she translated. He thought of her voice, soft yet sure, carrying authority without arrogance. For the first time in years, Alden felt humbled. He realized that his laughter that morning had been the laughter of ignorance. He had mocked what he didn't understand, assuming superiority over someone whose depth he had never cared to see. Now, the echo of that laughter haunted him, a symbol of how easily pride blinds the mind. The next day, he called Maria into his study again, not to test her, but to ask for help. He handed her another letter, this one written in French. "I believe you might be able to help with this as well," he said quietly. There was no mockery in his voice this time. Maria nodded, translated it with her usual precision, and left without a trace of self-satisfaction. Alden watched her go, struck by how effortlessly she carried her strength. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was grounded, self-contained. He began to see her not as a maid, but as a person of remarkable substance. For a man who had spent years defining people by wealth, it was a revelation. Weeks passed, and the household subtly changed. Alden became more aware of the people around him. The cook who hummed old songs while working, the gardener who recited poetry under his breath, the driver who could fix an engine blindfolded. Each of them carried a hidden story, a quiet brilliance overlooked by those too busy measuring success in numbers. Maria's simple act of translation had opened his eyes to something profound. Respect isn't earned by status. It's recognized through understanding. The world is full of unseen greatness, veiled beneath ordinary lives, and though Alden never made a grand apology, his behavior told the story instead. He treated Maria with quiet respect, occasionally seeking her insight, often listening where he once dismissed. Maria, for her part, continued her work as before, steady, graceful, unassuming. But between them existed an unspoken acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the day. Arrogance fell silent before truth. What began as a cruel joke had become a mirror held up to human nature itself, reflecting how quickly power fades when faced with wisdom. It was a lesson not shouted or preached, but lived. A moment that redefined how one man saw the world and how one woman reminded it that true value lies not in wealth, but in the mind and spirit that endure despite everything.